So if you're already a CIO, we have a couple other stories of things that maybe you should be paying attention to. We talked a lot about the earlier the $50 model and what that might mean to LLMs and SLMs. And what I think is interesting is it speaks to this idea of democratization of these models. And there's an interesting article that you found in CIO about the Windows 10, Microsoft sunsetting Windows 10, potentially accelerating as CIOs are then forced to do some refreshes on PCs about what has thus far been a bit of a laggard, this idea of an AI PC. And if you're not familiar, the premise, and I personally think it's a little shaky, but the premise is that these souped up PCs are AI PCs because they have processors that would allow you to start running local models. And I say it's been shaky because I've historically sort of said like with some exceptions for edge use cases and what have you, why would I do that? Why would I want to be by running local models? And I still largely believe that. I think that there's a recipe for disaster in deploying local models on PCs. But I do think that as getting back to what we said, as we see the cost of inference dropping and the ability to have these really small footprint models, where it's almost inevitably going to open up those use cases. And so I think it's interesting that this author Paula Rooney kind of brought it back to this focus on the AI PC and that we may see this surge. So what was your take on the article and why did you think that this was relevant here?
Yeah, the retirement of supporting Windows 10 in October is something that we've been expecting to happen for some time. But I think this is going to push Microsoft of course, they want to sell Copilot. They have spent billions of dollars already in AI and need to figure out how to monetize this. And from a cynical perspective, I think what is going to happen is that Copilot is going to be increasingly glued into Windows and take up more RAM and force us to buy these more of these 16 and 32 gig RAM machines just to be able to run Windows, because they have pushed so much into it. And then Microsoft will be able to claim all this new revenue based on AI. When really all we want is something that runs Windows. And
I'm not sure that's a fair criticism. I mean, first of all, there's no question that Apple's doing the same thing with Apple Intelligence, and we're seeing an increasing push there. They, from a privacy standpoint, are certainly trying to run their models locally, or moving in that direction. And isn't this the story of always that we've always had with technology? We introduce more features into the OS and into the. I mean, Apple again is notorious for this. That drives increased, power requirements, processing and actual power out of our devices, and so we kept having to buy bigger and bigger computers. I mean, certainly the laptop I run on is 10 times more powerful than the one I run on just a few years ago. So,
Mhm.
I don't know if any of that's an issue, but I guess the question if and you said that we saw it coming. I'm a Mac guy, so I don't pay attention to Windows at all. But I think if you're a CIO, I'm looking at this and going, how big of a deal is this? Does this matter? Is this going to be an impact? um and I'm not sure it does, other than I need a budget for it. I need to stick it in. To me, the big question is going to be, does this does this push me? Does this force me to start thinking about how I'm applying AI at a desktop level? And what does that do to my desktop? I mean, we are only a few years removed from the whole Chromebook movement, right? Where the whole idea was effectively going back to the dumb terminal, where we had almost no compute power because everything was in the cloud. And now we're having this talk about having souped up PCs because we need to be able to run local models. And I think it's this pendulum back and forth, right? So as a CIO, it's like, where are you landing on this? How do you build your strategy around that? And this goes back to really processing, how are you going to extract business value from these technologies, and what does that stack then need to look like to do that? And that's where I think the jury is a little bit out, and where I sort of see these AI PCs as a little bit of AI washing.
Yeah, and just from a pure math perspective, to run a billion parameter model, you need 2 to 4 gigs of RAM, and that pretty much ramps up linearly. So 2 billion parameters, 4 to 8 gigs of RAM. So you run into this barrier pretty quickly where you're not really going to be able to run anything bigger than, say, a 4 or 5 billion parameter model on your PC. So that is not an LLM. That is these SLMs, these custom models, these distilled models that we've been talking about. So I think there's going to be, if they are serious, if Microsoft is serious about AI, they're going to have to get more serious about either distilled models or some sort of custom model that they are providing on these PCs. So that could be another road to innovation as well. Perhaps Microsoft just ends up accepting and really perfecting these distilled models as part of the monetization strategy.
Well, and I do think it's interesting. And so, first of all, I think we're going to see the longstanding battle in approaches play out between Apple and Microsoft. So
Mm-hmm.
clearly, what you just described is exactly what Apple has said they're doing with Apple Intelligence, where
Yes.
we've
Mm-hmm.
got model components running on their devices. They are working very hard to try to minimize that load, and then doing calls. Right now, it's a call to ChatGPT, but logically, it will eventually be a call to an Apple-owned LLM for
Mm-hmm.
big processing to happen in the cloud. And it's going to be this sort of virtual handshake where you, as the consumer, have no idea what's happening. Microsoft, again, sort of true to form with Windows, is sort of taking a much more of a roll your own approach. They already have, I don't know the exact number, but a large number of SLMs in their model library sitting out there in the Azure marketplace.
Yeah.
And so the foundation is already there for them to have that exact same sort of an approach. And so from my standpoint, I look at this, and if you're a CIO, well, again, this has just complicated it. If I'm thinking about what is the strategy, all I've done is now increase the number of moving parts, and I need to
Mm-hmm.
now really be thinking it through so that I'm making the right investment. All that said, I don't think it stops me from buying. I think the same conversation about what level of PC I buy for an employee is going to be the exact same conversation I've always had. How important is the work they're doing? How intensive is it from a compute standpoint? That dictates what we buy them. I don't think, and that's where the whole AI PC I've always taken with a very large grain of hype salt, because I just felt like it was just slapping the AI label to try to justify a bigger spend.
Mm-hmm.